Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this unique unit deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at an always fan favorite and the original Cape Crusader, the Teutonic Knight. In addition to the usual breakdown of the unit, we're going to be looking specifically at whether it's truly as bonkers as its reputation suggests in melee, which units can reasonably counter it, and what advantages and disadvantages it brings compared to some of the Teuton's other melee options in some important roles. Now, one thing we have to get out of the way first is there are a lot of opinions floating around about the unit, which reflect its balance at different points. Teutonic Knights, especially in Definitive Edition, have had a large number of improvements, including their speed being dramatically improved from its original 0.65 tiles per second to now 0.8. Their non-elite attack and melee armor were then increased by 2, as well as then having its elite upgrade cost dropped by 350 resources. Even individually, they're now 10 gold cheaper, which altogether means a lot of the older criticism about the unit being incredibly slow and expensive doesn't necessarily apply as much as in the past, so we'll try to go in with an open mind. Taking a look at the unit, on the left we have their older stats just prior to Definitive Edition, with the current stats in the middle, and a Teuton Castle Age Longsword as a benchmark. Keep in mind, Teutons have Gambazons and their barracks units get +1 armor for free in Castle Age, giving those a respectable 4 of each type of armor. Even with that though, the Teutonic Knight is clearly much stronger, with an extra 5 attack, 20 HP, 5 more melee armor, with then the trade-off of being about 11% slower. Keep in mind, you do pay for those generally better stats, with 85 food and 30 gold compared to the Longsword line's 45 food and 20 gold with supplies. In addition to better stats, they then have a couple of hidden bonuses of +4 attack against eagles and buildings. Infantry always get a bad rap in Castle Age for lacking the mobility of cavalry, but to at least some extent brings something unique in being more anti-building. For some context, a fully upgraded knight deals 333 damage per minute to a typical Castle Age building, whereas longswords deal 360 to 420, depending on if you have arson, with a Tarkin doing 457 as an anti-building specialist cavalry unit. A Teutonic Knight improves on that, with up to 600 damage per minute with arson. It's good enough that 2 of them are faster at tearing through a building than a mangonel, and 3 can deal more damage than a battering ram. Obviously, this is without as much pierce armor or mobility as some of those alternatives, but still, it's something they're pretty good at. Now, speaking of that mobility and movement speed, if you were to name some of the slowest units in the game, the Teutonic Knight probably comes to mind, but in fairness, that is an aspect that's been greatly improved. They now split the difference between a monk with fervor and a battle elephant with husbandry, and while they're definitely slow for infantry, finding it hard to force engagements, with squires they can chase down villagers, which was not true in the past. Their other obvious drawback is requiring castles to be created, though to offset that, they have a pretty quick creation time, roughly half that of the swordsman line. As a side note, they're actually a nice complement to their castles, making them a very complete package. They give you a quick defense against enemy rams, with Teutons then getting free murder holes, herbal medicine to heal garrison units, and crenellations in Imperial Age, outranging even bombard cannons with siege engineers. It's one of the best examples of a castle and unique unit that work together in a way we usually reserve for talking about army compositions. So that's the unit at a glance, but now let's put them to the test in melee to see if they live up to their reputation, or if their relatively high cost makes them less dominant than expected when that's factored in. Remember, they're about double the total cost of an above-average Teuton longsword, which aren't exactly considered amazing melee units. Maybe the obvious place to start is by pitting them against some great longswordsmen, like Japanese, who attack 33% faster. Balancing resources, the Teutonic Knights end up with 77% of their HP left over, losing about 344 resources worth of value, compared to the Japanese longsword losing almost 1,500. These are top-tier Castle Age longswords, so right away it appears you are being well compensated by the Teutonic Knight's higher cost, and we're off to a good start. The numbers get even crazier against less impressive infantry as well, and head-to-head against generic pikemen, the Teutonic Knights inflict more like 7 times their losses, and you could even heal them up afterwards to recover that. Maybe an even better example of their melee prowess is against knights. In this case, in the always confusing battle between Teutonic Knights and Teuton Knights, the unique unit ends with almost 3/4 of their HP left, inflicting about 3.7 resources worth of knight losses for every 1 lost themselves. Not only is that objectively amazing value, but Teuton pikemen, including their +1 melee armor in a similar balanced resource fight, only inflict 3.1 resources for every 1 lost. That means the Teuton's unique unit isn't just more population efficient than pikemen against knights, but are even giving better value, assuming the knights just don't run away. Of course, the melee armor is the easy thing to point to, negating 3/4 of the knight's incoming damage, though also note the Teutonic Knight has pretty good HP and 4 more base attack than knights. Now, of course, there are a variety of potential counters in melee, especially from other unique units with special abilities, but we'll look at those in Imperial Age, as I think that's when you're more likely to run into them. As a general statement though, their reputation in melee is clearly well earned, even with the fact they're the most expensive infantry unique unit in the game. Instead, the real problem is ranged units, at least the ones dealing pierce damage. Archers of almost any kind are a very natural counter, given they can outrun them. That said, elite skirmishers actually aren't that great, as remember Teutonic Knights have the same pierce armor as a longsword with gambesons, taking just 1 damage per shot and requiring 80 elite skirmisher javelins each. A big enough mass could do it, but archers, or especially cavalry archers, just have a lot more piercing power. Siege is also a problem, with Mangonel's high melee attack breaking through and scorpions dealing pierce damage, so they're another very dangerous counter. Monks are also a threat worth mentioning, even if Teutons have some innate resistance to conversions from a team bonus. Considering their slow speed and high cost, the Teutonic Knight's extra 1 or 2 seconds per conversion doesn't really change the dynamic. In all honesty though, a lot of this is pretty intuitive, so let's jump ahead to Imperial Age to see what, if anything, changes, and then get into the interesting niche matchups like Samurai, Cataphracts, etc. First off, in Imperial Age, the Elite upgrade gives them another 20 HP, 3 more attack, a surprisingly useful +2 line of sight, and then of course +3 melee armor, bringing them up to a base of 10. It's not a cheap upgrade, especially in terms of food, but Teutons have a decent farming economy, and the upgrade helps out in a few different ways, not the least of which is the extra HP to resist ranged units. To give a rough sense of their melee strength at this point, we're talking about a roughly 3-to-1 trade in value against Japanese champions in melee, which is incredibly good. Halberdiers are likewise just completely destroyed, and even for Japanese, it's a 14-to-1 ratio in value lost when you start with comparable costing armies. A slight exception is Slav halberdiers, where it's still fairly one-sided, but their splash damage from unique tech lets them perform quite a bit better than usual. A somewhat related, more general point is that Teutonic Knights are actually a pretty effective anti-trash generalist in the late game. They take 100 shots from elite skirmishers, meaning you're either going to overrun them, or the skirmisher player is going to have to clear their schedule and dedicate an entire afternoon to microing your army 3 times around the map. Hussar and even Magyar Hussar then get virtually no value head-to-head, dealing just 1 damage each. Even the elite Geniteur, Malay two-handed swordsmen, and Persian crossbows are all relatively ineffective, so it seems reasonable to say elite Teutonic Knights at least soft counter any units that don't cost gold. Even if we hold the Teutonic Knight's 30 gold cost against it, I don't think that really changes the basic conclusion. If we have 20 elite Teutonic Knights fight against an overwhelming 30 halberdiers and 30 hussar at once, the Teutonic Knights only lose about 16% of their collective HP by the end. Replacing those units if all you had was food and using a market with the worst possible price to trade for gold would take 958 food. For Red to replace their army would take over 4 times that amount of food and wood, which is just to say that while Teutonic Knights cost quite a bit of gold to get rolling, once you have a handful of them, it's almost impossible to grind them down with trash units in a way that's cost effective, even if we highly value gold. Getting back to other melee benchmarks, even against Frank top-tier Paladins, from balanced starting resources, Teutons trade better than 3 for 1 in terms of losses. Again, for a little context, halberdiers in this sort of matchup get something pretty similar, saving gold but losing some pop efficiency. It's not a perfect comparison, but just to say elite Teutonic Knights are getting similar sorts of value against Paladins to an entirely anti-cavalry specialist unit. Just like in Castle Age, the way to beat them clearly isn't in melee, but instead with range. They take 25 Arbalester shots compared to the champion taking 18, but whatever you gain in more HP doesn't offset the higher cost and slower movement, so pretty much anything ranged that isn't a skirmisher should do fine, especially with a bit of micro. Of course, this is where Teuton Siege comes in, with a nearly complete tech tree and some extra melee armor for all of these from a unique tech. It's basically a more expensive version of the classic Halbin Siege pairing, which holds up much better against, say, enemy champions. With the general strengths and weaknesses out of the way though, let's finish up with some unique unit matchups, for trivia knowledge's sake, if nothing else. Outside of CBA, admittedly, you don't see pure unique unit armies smashing together that often, but there's some cool quirks and interactions that you might be wondering about. First off, can they beat their cousins, the Boyar? This has some pretty impressive melee armor of its own, though it actually ends up having a higher cost. So despite its speed advantage, the bowyer loses this matchup resoundingly, dropping 23 units and only bringing down 5 Teutonic Knights from similar starting numbers. Another curious case is the Obu, which on paper is the weaker unit, but is quite a bit cheaper and removes 1 armor with each strike. For an elite Teutonic Knight at low health, that's enough to completely strip its 13 melee armor. However, the presumably now naked Teutonic Knights still win the fight. If we threw in some skirmishers, there's maybe potential here for the Poles, as removing armor gives that unit a lot more sting, but directly head-to-head, Teutonic Knights have just enough armor to win. The next notable matchup is against Battle Elephants, as one of the few units they're almost able to keep pace with on the map. Usually the Elephant's trample damage and super beefy stats carry the day in these sorts of situations, but elite Teutonic Knights actually hold their own in a vacuum, winning after a very long fight. That said, they don't beat the elite Persian War Elephant with all upgrades in for both sides. The jump between the two types of elephants is larger than I think a lot of players realize, roughly doubling the HP, but then about 50% more base attack. I should point out the Teutonic Knight still makes it relatively close though. Next, we hit a whole string of unique units that can beat Teutonic Knights with bonus damage. This includes the Elite Samurai with its plus 12 against unique units, while being 30% cheaper and faster to train. They don't win one-on-one, but with balanced resources, it is a good fight for them. Likewise, Elite Jaguar Warriors with their unblockable plus 11 against infantry hold up relatively well, as long as they have a numbers advantage reflecting their lower cost. The Elite Cataphract also has some of that unblockable anti-infantry attack, along with splash damage as well, which bypasses armor. They're expensive to get rolling in practice, but have exactly the kind of bonuses you'd want against a Teutonic Knight, taking this fight fairly easily. There's then the 2 units that can ignore melee armor, which is as devastating as it sounds. The Lightest, even without a single relic, completely destroys them, and was presumably the matchup that inspired the Lightest ability in the first place, as a historical reference. Dravidians with Woot Steel also make pretty quick work of Teutonic Knights, especially the Yarumi Swordsman, with its charge attack helping to kick off a snowball effect, almost immediately wiping out, or maybe we should say whipping out, half the Teutonic army. Now, despite the string of one-sided results here at the end, remember these are very specific matchups based on bonuses or unique abilities, and generally it's safe to think of Teutonic Knights as insanely good in melee matchups. The fact they beat Khmer Battle Elephants cost effectively and get better value against the Knightline than Pikes, or similar to Halberdiers in Imperial Age, speaks volumes, even if they leave a lot to be desired against archers. Maybe the more underrated aspect of the unit is actually its anti-building potential, along with its anti-trash flexibility. Especially with their drop in gold cost from 40 to 30, there's an argument it can still take some good trades even through selling food and wood at the market to create. You also need to think of them in the context of Teutons having good siege, giving those units protection from enemy cavalry, with siege then protecting the Teutonic Knights from archers and other ranged threats. Another option is to mix them in to complement your knights in fighting some of their hard counters or helping to break through buildings, with a side role of protecting your forward castles. Their weaknesses are pretty obvious, and it's mostly niche use cases they thrive, but they perfectly suit the Teuton's identity in-game and at times can take some amazing trades. They're also a good candidate for use inside of rams and siege towers as well, especially with the new quality of life features for quick garrisoning. It's a good way to keep them safe from archers, and in the case of the siege tower, can allow them to get around the map over 40% faster. That's actually the premise of my newest side business, an AoE2 taxi service called Spirit of the Lift. My new side hustle even has a great website thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a great-looking website, engage with your audience, and then sell anything, from products to content to time, all in one place. Using one of their templates, you can easily customize a website to your preferred aesthetic, and then sell your product or services. That could include physical goods or digital content, including access to your own video library, with Squarespace handling the payment side of things so you can focus on the bigger picture. Using the built-in analytic and insight tools, you can then see exactly what's working and what's not, so you can continue to grow and scale your business more effectively. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/spiritofthelaw to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So that was a deep dive of the Teutonic Knight, its limitations, and the way it truly does live up to the hype. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.